Tonight on Reporting Scotland, a partial U-turn by RBS as the bank gives a temporary reprieve to 10 Scottish branches they plan to close. Calls for Stagecoach to be barred from running rail services after the financial failure of the East Coast Main Line. A warning that the private care sector is on the brink after the closure of another home for the elderly.
Vote for women, deeds not words.
MSPs debate the centenary of the legislation that gave some women the right to vote, but the campaign for equality goes on.
We're still fighting for rights for women, not paying women for the job they're doing the same as men. We haven't moved. In fact, at times you feel you've moved backwards.
And later in the programme.
The soldier's home, and he's not alone. Da-da-da-dum.
Creative Scotland reverses a controversial decision to cut funding from 5 arts organisations. Good evening. The Royal Bank of Scotland has announced a partial U-turn on its plans to close 62 branches. It will keep 10 of those under threat of closure open until at least the end of the year, while independent research is carried out into their usage. It follows intense pressure from politicians and customers on bank bosses and on its principal shareholder, the UK government. Andrew Anderson reports.
Open for business, for the time being at least. This is the RBS branch on Comrie's High Street, earmarked for closure, now granted a temporary reprieve. Just across the road, the village butcher, one of the businesses which feared it would be hit if Comrie loses its bank.
Fortunately, some shops have card machines, so they're able to take payments that way. But traditionally, people particularly elderly people, like to deal in cash, and small businesses rely on that ability to have cash and till.
The branches granted a reprieve for at least the rest of the year are spread around the country, from Tongue in the north to Gretna in the south, mainly where there's no other RBS branch within 9 miles. But there's no stay of execution for the other 52 branches. Soon the nearest bank for customers in the Borders village of Duns will be in England. RBS said the decision to close this branch, along with 61 others across Scotland, was driven by changes in its customers' behaviour. Fewer going into the branch, more banking online. But the decision outraged politicians and local communities. But there's no guarantee any of the original 62 banks will remain open. Tonight, RBS said, during this period, we will monitor the level of transactions and new income at each branch, and if there is a sustained and viable increase in both, then we will reconsider the closure of the relevant branch as part of a full independent review. The union representing RBS staff has pledged to keep up the pressure on the bank.
We want transparency, we want accountability, we want to understand on what basis they're making the decisions. And we would like still the UK government to intervene in this closure programme because, as you can see, Unite's pressure, community pressure, has led to a stay of execution for some of the branches.
BBC Scotland understands the RBS Chief Executive, Ross McEwen, is to be summoned before MPs at Westminster. It follows an emergency session earlier today of the Scottish Affairs Committee, held following the bank's announcement. RBS says it's listened to its customers. In this Perthshire village, they're hoping they have the bank's ear and they can see off the closure threat for good. Andrew Anderson, reporting Scotland, Comrie.
The Perth-based company Stagecoach and Virgin Trains should be barred from running any rail service after the failure of their contract to run the East Coast Main Line. Well, that's according to former Transport Secretary Lord Adonis. Yesterday, the government said Stagecoach would lose hundreds of millions of pounds after overbidding for the East Coast service. Here's our transport correspondent, David Henderson.
It carries 20 million passengers a year on the line from Edinburgh to London. But the East Coast service, run by Virgin and Stagecoach, has hit the financial buffers so hard they can no longer honour the contract they signed.
The problem is very straightforward. Stagecoach got its numbers wrong, it overbid, and it is now paying a price. There is no question of anyone receiving a bailout. Stagecoach will be held to all of its contractual obligations in full.
Stagecoach pay a massive price for their decision to bid high for this rail contract. They've run up losses of £200 million. But for now, they're still being paid to operate the East Coast service, so passengers don't notice a difference. Stagecoach and Virgin may have struggled to run the East Coast service, but the UK government has just awarded another of their joint ventures an extension to the contract to run the West Coast service between Glasgow and London. Critics call that a reward for failure. This former Transport Secretary says Stagecoach and Virgin should both be banned from operating rail contracts across the UK.
When National Express reneged on their contract for the East Coast Main Line in 2009, I banned them, as Secretary of State for Transport, from operating future rail services. They are no longer in the rail business. The same should happen to Virgin and Stagecoach. If they're not prepared to honour their commitments to taxpayers, then they shouldn't be in the rail business in the first place, and we should have a state company instead.
Tonight, the Scottish Government said the East Coast Rail Line should stay in public ownership. Their voice just the latest, calling for a change of direction for our railways. David Henderson reporting Scotland.
The performance of Scotland's A&E units has continued to improve after reaching a record low around New Year. The latest weekly stats show just under 90% of people attending emergency departments were admitted, transferred or discharged within 4 hours. This was up from a record low of nearly 78% in the first week of the year. A Scottish judge has halted an attempt to get the European Court to decide if the UK can stop the Brexit process. A cross-party group of politicians wanted to go to the European Court of Justice for a ruling on whether Brexit could be called off without the consent of the rest of the EU members. But Lord Doherty ruled against them at the Court of Session, saying their bid had no real prospect of success. Campaigners say they're hoping to appeal. The umbrella group Scottish Care has warned Scotland's private sector care homes are fighting for survival. The closure of another home, this time in East Lothian, was announced today with the loss of 16 beds and 27 jobs. It comes amid warnings from Audit Scotland. The care home funding model is unsustainable. Maura Kinneborough reports.
Sadness and dismay in Musselburgh. This, the latest care home to shut.
It's lovely in there. It's well done, and the meals are second to none.
The company says the building is below modern standards. It's been running at a loss for years and it's too costly to adapt.
It's frightening what they're doing with the nursing homes. And this is it. You're saving up for your old age and you think you're going to be cared for. Well, the nearest one, well, this is for all the local people, this one here. So what's going to happen is they're going to send them miles away from their family.
No closure date has been announced yet. New homes have still to be found for the 16 residents here, and 27 staff are looking for other work. This is the latest in a long list of elderly care homes being closed in Scotland, despite increased demand for this kind of care and the knock-on impact it's having on the NHS.
The care home owner says the Scottish Government must do more to prevent a full-blown crisis of care.
Well, I think we are staggering towards the edge of the cliff in this regard, and more care homes are closing. What happens with that is it's more bed blocking.
We currently get absolutely nothing back from the Scottish Government for this jobs tax.
Claims the Scottish Government isn't funding the care sector properly have been rejected.
We have, as you'll be aware, provided significant resources to pay the living wage, for example, to all parts of the sector, including the independent sector. That is something that we felt was important in terms of helping them to recruit and retain staff.
As more of us live longer, more care homes are finding it harder to recruit nurses, harder to meet costs, harder to reach regulations. The umbrella group Scottish Care has said dignity comes at a price, and it's a cost we're not paying at the moment. Maura Kinneborough reporting Scotland, East Lothian.
A 22-year-old man who threw a 2-month-old baby into the air on numerous occasions has been jailed for 13 months. A lawyer for Liam Simpson, who has learning difficulties, said he didn't appreciate the damage he was inflicting. The child was found to have broken ribs and fractures to his leg after being taken to hospital. Simpson admitted culpable and reckless conduct and will be supervised for 12 months on release from prison. Hamilton Akis is launching a legal action against RBS after it was defrauded of almost £1 million. The club recovered around £170,000 after being targeted in a scam last October. It's now aiming to recoup half of the £800,000 that remains outstanding. RBS said it was confident there was no breakdown in its security procedures, and the bank is working with Police Scotland to identify the culprits. Divers say they've found evidence of illegal scallop dredging in a protected area in the Firth of Lorne near Oban. Broken shells and dislodged boulders were recovered off Inch Island, where fishing gear is banned. Campaigners say the system of marine protected areas isn't being properly policed. Our environment correspondent Kevin Keane can tell us more.
In the Firth of Lorne, a dive, not to collect scallops, but to document the destruction from illegal dredging. Broken shells, dislodged boulders, and even fresh meat, suggesting the disturbance is recent. The dredgers drag gear along the seabed to collect the shellfish, but in marine protected areas, or MPAs, they're banned from operating.
It's a massive concern. It's a tragic situation. If this seabed was left alone, it would recover. But instead, we've got illegal dredging going on. This is not an isolated incident. It's a crime.
The divers who found the damage believe dredgers are operating here frequently, without tracking devices and even at night.
How confident are you that it was dredging?
Absolutely 100%. There's the shells, a couple of shells I brought up, but one of them I brought up and it showed where the top shell had been, which is a flat shell, and that had been stabbed by the sword of the dredge, had gone through the top shell and broken a piece off.
Critics say the MPAs are too big for Marine Scotland to effectively police. This one runs from the point of Ardnamurchan through to the Sound of Jura. The fishing limits were agreed with the industry, who condemn those responsible.
Scotland has almost a world-leading MPA system. It's a work in progress, but it was done properly with the participation of the fishermen. That's the whole point. So when this sort of thing happens, we just roundly condemn it.
The disturbance follows damage last year to a rare reef in Loch Carron. The Scottish Government says its compliance boats do patrol these areas. As more MPAs are considered, the Scottish Greens want the fleet of patrol boats to grow. Kevin Keane, reporting Scotland.
It's 19 minutes to 7. A reminder now of tonight's main story. A partial U-turn by RBS as the bank gives a temporary reprieve to 10 Scottish branches they'd planned to close. And still to come,
And he's not alone.
Creative Scotland reverses a controversial decision to cut funding from 5 arts organisations. It's 100 years since some women first got the vote. In 1918, after a long and bitter campaign, the right to vote was extended to women with property who were aged over 30. In the same law, men were allowed to vote at the age of 21. The centenary has been widely celebrated, but at Holyrood, female MSPs warned that the fight for equality must be stepped up as women continue to face discrimination over pay and status. This from our political editor, Brian Taylor.
Vote for women, deeds not words.
Holyrood women MSPs echo that century-old demand. Politics, pride, but personal too. Remember this? Nicola Sturgeon's niece Harriet congratulates her on becoming First Minister. Now she says there's a debt to repay to the coming generation.
I want us to make sure that by the time, my 11-year-old niece and her generation are young women, they're not still talking about these things. So that's what I mean when I say that my generation of women really have to do for the next generation what the suffragettes did for us.
Outside Holyrood, the suffragette flag flutters freely in the breeze. Inside, MSPs say women's equality remains unfinished business.
Most ordinary women up and down the country know that they don't have equality.
Oh, it's not an end, never an end, it's only a beginning. And an absolute milestone, but just the beginning.
One thing they didn't do was give up, and they kept going, and that's our legacy.
I feel a pride for what women before us have done. It's women that have enabled us to be here.
This is completely unfinished business.
What we're doing is showing solidarity with the women from 100 years ago.
And the Conservative leader argues that suffragettes who faced prosecution should now be pardoned.
I think that would be absolutely right to recognise those righteous pioneers and trailblazers for what they were, rather than them staying on the books as criminals.
Women over 30 on this day have the vote.
In the Royal Mile, storytellers replicate that century-old era of protest. Even as new equality challenges emerge, that historic demand still resonates.
Votes for women! Deeds, not words!
Brian Taylor, reporting Scotland.
Well, the fights for the vote in Scotland involved women from all walks of life. They campaigned and demonstrated here, and some were key players in the UK-wide movement. Rebecca Curran now looks at their involvement and what impact their actions has had on female voters, young and old, today.
Everywhere suffragettes throw stones, shout, chain themselves to railings and resist everything, including arrest.
They campaigned for decades, shoulder to shoulder, for one thing.
Votes for women.
They fought and died. It was 5 years after Emily Davidson's death that some women over the age of 30 got the vote.
All the suffragettes in the demonstration were sentenced.
A century on, Scotland's suffragettes are being remembered by relatives. Jenny McCallum from Dunfermline was arrested after storming the House of Commons in 1908.
They were fined £5, but they refused to pay it, which I think was the policy, and so they went to prison in Holloway for a month.
How do you feel about Jenny and what she did?
Well, I'm really proud of her. Yeah, both on behalf of our family and also on behalf of Scottish women in general.
This is a Scottish suffragette called Mary Phillips, who was sent to prison in Holloway.
Sarah Pedersen has written a book on the way suffragettes were portrayed in the press. Propaganda was produced. One Scot often made the headlines.
Ethel Moorhead was one of the most militant Scottish suffragettes. If there was damage being done to property, you could probably guarantee that Ethel Moorhead was somewhere there. She was finally arrested and taken to Calton Jail in 1914, went on hunger strike, and she's the first Scottish prisoner to be force-fed.
Everybody was so glad that women got the vote.
92-year-old Jean Smith first voted in 1950 and has done ever since.
It's sad when you think of fighting those days and we're still fighting for rights for women, isn't it really? So to think of us still not paying women for the jobs they're doing the same as men, and they're still at that, really, you know. So we haven't moved. In fact, at times you feel you've moved backwards.
But are the next generation of female voters as enthusiastic?
I think it's really important that women are able to have a say, considering that a long time ago we didn't have a say. So yeah, I make sure to vote every time.
It's your right to vote, as especially as a woman, people fought for the vote, and so it's very important that you do go out and vote. Do you vote?
I actually haven't voted that much, but I probably should.
Some say the victory of securing votes in 1918 was more to do with women's work in the war than the suffragettes. But their long march for women's votes continued, and in 1928 women finally achieved the same voting rights as men. Rebecca Curran reporting Scotland.
Well, much of today's anniversary has focused on the world of politics, as we saw earlier. How women can achieve equal representation in that sphere is still being debated 100 years on. Currently, fewer than 1 in 3 MPs are women. Our political correspondent Nick Herdley has been speaking to 2 of the youngest women MPs about what Westminster is like for them and what they think still needs to be changed.
Marching through central London for something that now seems a given. A century on from women winning the right to vote, much in the political landscape has changed. Outside Parliament stands a statue celebrating Emmeline Pankhurst, the most famous suffragette. Labour's youngest MP says lots has changed since her day, but not enough.
I've had quite a positive experience as a young woman, and I think that's quite a big change, and I'm keen that that change continues. It's never going to be mission accomplished until we see society completely reflected in Parliament, and in all walks of life. But we're getting there, and we've certainly come leaps and strides in the past 100 years. But it's due to people fighting, it's due to passion, it's due to hard work. So we can't take that for granted.
There are monuments to women's suffrage around Parliament, an installation in Westminster Hall celebrating the movement, and in the shop, memorabilia commemorating the extension of the franchise. The SNP's Kirsty Blackman says Parliament still feels like a male-dominated place.
The statues in Parliament are overwhelmingly men. The pictures in Parliament and paintings in Parliament are overwhelmingly painted by men. If we're talking 0 being a position where women have absolutely no rights whatsoever, and 10 where we have absolutely full equality in everything that is going on, I think we're probably around the halfway mark. So I don't think we've yet got to the stage that we're anywhere near actual equality.
This window in Parliament documents the history of the vote up to devolution. Lots has changed in the century it marks. Some hope there's more to come. Nick Eddy reporting Scotland, Westminster.
Now, after 2 resignations, several public campaigns and an emergency board meeting, Creative Scotland has reversed a controversial decision to cut funding from 5 arts organisations. One of them is Catherine Wheels, which is based at the Brunton Theatre in Musselburgh, from where our arts correspondent Pauline McLean joins us. So, bring us up to date on this, Pauline.
Well, Jackie, this should have been a good news story. The government had given Creative Scotland an extra £6.6 million to add to their funding to make up for a lottery shortfall. But in adding 19 new companies to their roster, they had to drop 20 well-respected and successful organisations from their regular funding list. They include some very high-profile names, including Catherine Wheels, who are based here in Musselburgh. When they're not in Musselburgh, they're touring the world. They've been to China, Japan and New Zealand in the last few years, and they were obviously the subject of a very high-profile campaign when that funding was removed. Huge outcry, as you say, 2 board members resigned, open letters and petitions, and then today this announcement that the emergency board meeting had come out with, that they have secured £2.6 million to bring 5 of the companies, including Catherine Wheels, back onto regular funding. They're obviously delighted, the other 15 companies less so. Janet Archer, the chief executive, well, she said today that they had got things wrong, but the important message is that they are now listening.
I'm sure I'm going to have some really tough conversations over the next few weeks with people who will criticise and continue to criticise and feel that they perhaps haven't been listened to in the way that they deserve. And all I would say is we, all of us here absolutely want to connect, listen, think hard about how we move forwards. We're dealing with public funding, and it's really important that we get it right.
And as I say, those 15 companies, 15 organisations who didn't receive regular funding, who've not been reprieved, will continue, I think, to campaign and to appeal that decision. Already tonight we've heard from Air Gaiety, who were one of the 15, who said that they thought that the decision left a funding black hole in Ayrshire, and they would continue to challenge the decision by Creative Scotland. I suspect they're not going to be the only one.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Some sport now, and Scotland's only try-scorer in the crushing Cardiff defeat says the team won't play as badly again in this season's Six Nations. Peter Horne has revealed that the squad did some tough talking behind the scenes after conceding 34 points to Wales. More from David Curry.
Even when accompanied by up-tempo beats, training sessions can be tough. Behind closed doors, honesty sessions, though, can be brutal. After the weekend walloping in Wales, Scotland players felt one was essential.
And Harpenny's in! It's 2 tries in 12 minutes for Wales!
You know, you can't run away from your problems, you've got to stand up and face them, and I think we've got an honest group who do that, you know, where everyone be honest with themselves, and we know that we didn't put in a performance that was acceptable, and yeah, we've just got to make sure we're striving to do whatever it takes this week to never repeat it.
The effectiveness or otherwise of such soul-searching can be gauged this weekend when Scotland play the second match of their Six Nations campaign, and this time it's at Murrayfield.
Everybody's eyes are wide open on what's coming at the end of the week. A France team who put up a fantastic fight against Ireland. What a challenge for us. You get knocked down, the strength of character to be able to stand strong. and go back at it the next week and find an answer.
France suffered an opening day defeat too, losing at home to Ireland. Mind you, they did score the only try of the match. The French may also have had a post-match honesty session, but this weekend it's deeds, not words, that will count. David Curry, reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
Now let's get the weather now. There's a new look, but sadly the weather itself is still the same.
No upgrade to the presenter either, Jackie. Thank you very much indeed. Hello there. It was a rather wintry start to the day for many of us. This is the satellite picture. This strip of cloud here is what brought the snow last night. Behind it, the speckled clouds, some showers, but equally some sunshine and beautiful blue skies for many of us across the country today, as captured by our weather watchers. But those clear skies staying with us tonight, meaning a very cold night, mostly dry, and there will be a risk of ice. Now, I say mostly dry because you'll see still a rash of showers across the north and around the west coast. These wintry, some snow even to low levels. Elsewhere, mostly dry, but with clear skies. Well, temperatures well below freezing, even in towns and cities. So tomorrow morning, it's a cold, icy start. Eastern areas getting off to a bright, sunny morning, but the cloud in the west quickly moving eastwards and followed on behind by some outbreaks of rain. So by mid-afternoon, fairly cloudy, still quite cool with that cloud as well. Some outbreaks of rain there through Orkney and Shetland in towards the far north, but most of Murray, Aberdeenshire and down towards Angus, the capital, and the southeast, largely dry, but cloudy compared with the morning. Further west, cloudy with some outbreaks of rain. The white there on the chart is snow, but that's chiefly on the hills. And there is something a little bit milder coming in, 8 degrees there in Stornoway. Then as we go through Wednesday night into Thursday, that whole system will slowly pull away, and behind it, some cold air set to return, probably later in the day on Thursday. So reasonably mild in the west tomorrow and indeed on Thursday, but cold air coming back. So this is Thursday. You can see fairly cloudy, some brightness towards the north and northeast, some showery outbreaks of rain, and temperatures around 7 or 8 Celsius, but the temperatures then tumbling, and come Friday, back to those colder conditions. Anything falling out of the sky will be wintry. These showers of snow will be heavy at times. Some sunshine, the best of that likely in the east and northeast. And once again, really rather chilly. That's the forecast for now.
Thank you, Christopher. And now a reminder of tonight's main news. The Royal Bank of Scotland has announced a partial U-turn on its plan to close 62 branches. It will keep 10 of those under threat of closure open until at least the end of the year, while independent research is carried out into their usage. And that's Reporting Scotland. We're back at 10:30. From everyone in the team, good evening.